Okay, today's vlog request comes from I Want to Be Your Dog, asking me to reflect on my teenage years from 12 to 19, because they're kind of crucial in terms of development and stuff. Now, I just want to dispute that a little bit, because for me, particularly with glass child trauma, that started when I was very young. So I think my early childhood is also a really big deal, and also that's when some of the early signs of me being a little bit different were popping up and maybe foreshadowing the schizoid and depression issues. But I will skip that. We'll get straight into the teenage kind of period, just to make it, because otherwise this will go on forever. Now it's a little bit difficult for me to remember this time of my life, and it's a long time. There's a lot of stuff that happened. So I've tried to make notes on like what might be the most interesting or significant to mention. So we'll start with when I was 12. So that would have been year 6, last year of primary school. I'm not sure what the equivalent is for Americans out there. But yeah, so I think like primary school, by the end of primary school, things were not too bad for me. I was doing okay. There were some weird things though, like there was this maths program before school, and I was like already the sort of top math student in my class, and my year 6 teacher talked to my parents like, why isn't she coming to this morning maths program, blah blah blah. And it's because I hadn't told them about it, basically, because I thought, because they're too busy looking after my disabled brother, I just thought they didn't have time to drive me early in the morning to get to school in time for this maths program. And so I started it later than all the other kids. Like once my parents found out, they're like, why didn't you tell us? And they drove me in. And I ended up coming first. I've still got the trophy for that, a maths trophy. Oh my God. So there's things like that where I already wasn't asking for help and trying not to ask for too much. And I think like I already would have had some introverted things going on. I think I've always had introverted things going on, like, in primary school playing Game Boy. By then I would have been reading a lot as well. I think actually I started reading a lot maybe in year 2, I don't know. Anyway, so like I was doing okay, but there were already some signs of issues. And then I think towards the end of that year is probably when puberty started for me. And of course, puberty is when a lot of the brain changes really take off and set in, and if mental illnesses are going to show themselves, puberty is a good time for them to like really kick into gear. So then early high school, and just high school in general, like early on, the main things I noticed is that the way my friends changed, and they all kind of became a bit too serious. Like that was the biggest shock for me. In primary school, like I think in early primary school I was a bit of a like keeping to myself a lot, but when I did find a friendship group to be in, I kind of gravitated to the ones who were doing more, like in terms of the way they were playing in the playground, they were sticking to more fantasy based elements, like they were reading similar stuff to me. Animorphs was a big deal for me, and so playground play was more about that. It wasn't about playing mummies and daddies and whatever. It was about fantasy type stuff. And I think when I got to high school, I kind of expected that to continue, but they all started to get like, no, I've got to study, and it just got a little bit too serious. And so I did, there were a couple friends, like new girls to the school, who I made friends with, and we got on well, but we were kind of, the way we got on, we kind of just laughed at a lot of stuff, and it was a bit strange, I gotta say. I don't remember a whole lot more about that, but so year 7, the first year of high school, it was a bit of a shock to me in terms of like, suddenly people don't want to do the fantasy thing. And I know fantasy is a big deal for a lot of schizoids, and that's probably why I was drawn to that. And so then I'm on my own and start having to do more fantasy stuff on my own. Also, year 7 is when I think that's my first clear memory of definitely being dissociated, because that's when we had to do more speeches. In primary school, sometimes like we had a debating thing, and I managed to postpone my debating slot until the very last one in the year. And then I think that happened to coincide with my family going on holiday, or else I was sick. And so I managed to avoid debating that way in primary school. In high school though, that doesn't fly. Like if you miss assessment day, they just make you do it another day. So I had to do the speech thing. And very quickly started to realize that when I was doing speeches, like I was super nervous before I went up, but then I'd go up and just be on autopilot and then sit back down and just sort of be like, oh. And in hindsight, I realized that's the first experience, like clear experience I have of definitely dissociating and knowing that I'd dissociated. I just didn't have words for it at the time. Also, I'm not sure if it was year 6 or year 7, but you know, as I mentioned, Animorphs, I think might have been book 43. I looked it up before I came here, but I didn't write it down. In one of the books, they mention a website that the Yeerks have a forum on, and they're talking about, like, you know, different Yeerk activity. Yeerks are if you don't know Animorphs, I enjoyed it. I used to be able to read one book in an hour. Like, they're only small, like, you know, teenager level books, but I'd read the whole book in an hour. So Yeerks are like aliens that go in your ear and take over your brain, and they're so convincing that you don't know who has been taken over, and that kind of makes it creepy. And also, like, you can imagine that that is how it actually is in your real life. It's only later in the books that bigger events happen that, you know, you're like, that didn't happen in real life. Whereas earlier in the books, you can totally get invested in it and think, gee, I wonder if my teacher is a Yeerk. So yeah, but I really enjoyed that. And you know, the mind control thing fits in with the possession thing, which fits in with what I class in an umbrella of my duality obsession. It's all about like self-control and stuff. And so it fit within that. Like, I didn't know that was a theme at the time for me, but yeah, the whole possession, like not necessarily being in control of yourself, I guess it fits in with the dissociation kinds of things. And yeah, I already had a disconnect. Like, even in primary school, I had a disconnect with my sense of self and my behavior. But yeah, so I think that's why I was partly drawn to Animorphs. Like, yes, being able to transform into an animal was also attractive, but also the mind control stuff. Like, anytime they had a book that talked in depth, like about what it was like to be taken over by a Yeerk or whatever, I really got into those books. Anyway, by book 43 or so, they're talking about this website, and it was called earthisours.com. Me being me with early access to the internet, I typed it in, earthisours.com, and found out it was a real website. I don't think it exists anymore, and if it exists, it would exist in a different form. Someone would have resurrected it, so you probably can't see what it used to be like, unless maybe the Wayback Machine snapshotted it. I haven't actually checked. Anyway, in Earthy's Hours, apart from other things, they had that forum section. And that's when I came across the idea of RPGing, because people were role-playing. Now, it was a very basic message board, and it wasn't like Dungeons and Dragons where there are strict rules. It was just sort of people saying stuff, and you didn't even need to log in. You could just say that you were this person, and yeah, so I was like constantly making posts from different character perspectives, and some of them were quite unhinged. So unhinged that I'm too embarrassed to say what that was about. But eventually I settled into, you know, a handful of characters, and eventually a bunch of us started crafting more of a story. And then the board got shut down and moved to monster boards. I don't even remember if that's a thing, but that's what we called it, monster boards. And that's when the RPG thing really kicked off. And by the time September 11 came around, that was a huge part of my life. I would go to school during the day and do the whole quiet Catholic schoolgirl thing, and then come home at night and write very violent stories. It wasn't just Animorphs, it was also, by that point, we had incorporated more like Dragon Ball Z type themes, and yeah, we just sort of drew from a lot of sources. I also had a bit of a Digimon thing going on, and we kind of combined a lot of stuff. It was a real mishmash, and I've never come across a RPG type thing like it ever again, and such a nostalgic thing. Anyway, so when September 11 happened, that's what I was doing, is I was up, you know, and I remember Dad coming in. This is when we were living in a different house as well. Dad came in and was like, oh, plane just hit a building. And I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'm too busy doing my RPGing. And then he comes in, another plane just hit a building. And then I'm like, okay, whatever. And then as I was getting ready for bed, I walked past the TV and, you know, saw the whole buildings coming down. And I'm just like, oh, wow. And I just watched that for like ages after, because the whole destruction thing. And like, you know, that's why I was on the RPG, because that destructive part of me needed an outlet. And then suddenly September 11's here, and that's why I remember it very vividly. And then the next day at school is when I realized, that's when I realized for sure I was different to other people, because you know, we had a computer room sort of set up, and I would go there every morning, partly to do the RPG thing. I was already like very much on the internet, and everyone who was in there, they were looking up pictures of people jumping out of the buildings, and you know, and also like pictures of the towers and stuff. And I mean, I was fascinated more on the destructive side of things and the drama of it. But then there was, I can't remember if I overheard, whether it was on the PA or I overheard teachers, or I think that was maybe in the room, the teachers were saying something like, oh, look, isn't it like, you know, great that the students are so concerned and whatever. And I was just like, I'm not concerned. I'm here to sort of be entertained in some way. And I mean, like, I thought for a while they might be lying, you know, because I thought everyone might be like me. They're just there to sort of suck up the drama. And a lot of people are like that. That's why you see mostly bad news on the news, and why a lot of reality TV shows go for drama. But I've also, like, you know, with a lot of natural disasters, people actually do get concerned about each other. And so, yeah, like, you know, I sort of doubted for a while, but I realized, yeah. And at the time I was like, oh, that's not why I was doing it. I am definitely different to these people. That is not my experience. So that's when I first started to realize I might be different. September 11, it was a huge deal for me. And, you know, if we're talking about my bullshit split personality, the other part of me for a long time decided that would be its birthday when it would celebrate its birthday. And I've tried not to do that the past few years, but it's still a thing in my brain, even though it has nothing to do with when it actually became a thing for me. Anyway, with the RPG also, that's when the name Destroyer or title Destroyer came up, when the monster boards came in, because you had to choose an avatar from a preset list, and the one I chose looked kind of evil, but I was supposed to be a good guy, and so I'm like, oh, I used to be this Destroyer character. And then, of course, the Destroyer character became an actual character in the story, and that's where that whole outlet for me was for a long time. That's how I dealt with that part of me. Yeah. And so a lot of my mental instability actually came out in the character that I was writing. And oh my God, I have a whole document on that too, but I probably won't share it for a long time, if ever. If I die though, just a note, someone tell someone to look at my hard drive. I have a backup hard drive, and because you won't be able to log into my computer probably, but there is a backup hard drive that has that. And if someone could grab that, and then you can have it then. When I'm dead, you can have that document. Because I think it would be sad for that to die. But anyway, getting a little bit off topic. So like year 7, that was a big transition for me. Year 8, the next year, kind of the same. You know, things kept going, but like with the friends who I used to laugh a lot with, that stopped being a thing. And I think I became increasingly socially isolated, because what happened in year 8 is they had the first school dance, as in girls' school with boys' school. I think it's a little more like, you know, they just go and have a disco or something. And I didn't go to the first one because I'm like, why would I go and hang out with boys? And so I missed that, and everyone came back the next day, and suddenly the only thing they can talk about is boys. Like, it happened overnight. It was the freakiest, weirdest thing to me, because I went to an all-girls school, right? And, you know, so not only, like, you know, going into year 7, people stopped doing the fantasy thing. Going into year 8, suddenly everyone is just thinking about boys. And I'm just sitting here like, what the fuck? So there was another dance later in the year, and I'm like, I better go and see what this is about. So I went to the dance. And I just didn't understand. Like, I really made an effort. This is something I do a lot in my life, is I'm always trying to make an effort to understand what I'm supposed to be excited about. But yeah, I just didn't get, like, while I was there, it took me a while. You know, I had a few dance offers and I was just like too shy, I didn't know. But towards the end, I was like, okay, fine, I'll give it a go. And I just didn't get it. Like, in the car on the way home, I tried saying the things that I'd heard the other girls saying about the dance and about the boys. But then the next day I was like, no, it's just not me. I'm not convinced by that. And so, yeah, that I became increasingly alienated because I had nothing in common with these chicks. And that's all they wanted to talk about. And I was still playing Pokemon, and I was still doing my RPGing. And there were a few gaps throughout high school with the RPGing. I don't remember what years they were. They're probably the years I struggled the most, actually. But yeah, no, like, I was still keeping that habit up. I was reading books. So I think, yeah, that's probably when I became increasingly withdrawn, because I just didn't connect with the dating kind of thing, no interest. And yeah, I don't remember when I came up with the word asexual. It might have been around then, because by then I would have known I was an atheist. Like, it was in late primary school I figured that out. And you know, if atheist means you don't believe in God. So I was like, you know, when I found out that there's like homosexuals, like heterosexuals, homosexuals, bisexuals, I'm like, oh, well, if I'm not into this, I must be an asexual by the same logic. And then, of course, I went on the internet and found out it wasn't a clever thing. It was already a thing. But I didn't stay on those forums, because back then, even then, I was like, this is weird. All they talk about is sex. Very strange paradox there. But yeah, so I sort of figured that out about myself. People are like, oh, you're not old enough yet to know that about yourself. Or if you haven't known, you know, the whole bullshit thing. Anyway, so yeah, then in year nine is when I was definitely depressed. Like, I think towards the end of year 8 I was getting depressed, but by year 9 I was definitely depressed. I didn't get diagnosed because I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know to ask help, but I was really struggling. But I was struggling silently, and I had a friend at the time. So like, the social situation when I first got into high school, it was mostly my primary school friends who'd moved on to the high school with me, plus a few extras came in. But then, I don't know, somehow that kind of shifted, I guess, as I had less in common with them. So then, you know how there's like people in a school who are like the losers of the school? They're so desperate for company that they, like, no one wants to hang out with them because they're too clingy. And so they kind of reinforce their own sort of loser status that way. Whereas there was me, I'm a loner. I like being alone. And so because I kept to myself, the losers, I'm sorry to use this terminology, but this is the easiest way to explain it. Because they'd see me keeping to myself, they'd think I was one of them. And so then I'd get the losers hanging around me, and I'm just like, oh my God, go away. So there was a bit of that going on. But yeah, basically the original friendship group that I had come into high school with, I sort of was less and less socializing with them at that point in time. And there was one particular girl that I was hanging out with more and more, and she became very clingy, which I found quite difficult. And then when I became depressed, she also would happen to be depressed. But unlike me, she would cry publicly and go into the bathroom and cry and get all this sympathy. And I was expected, like, you know, it was thought that I was her best friend or something. So I was expected to go in the bathroom and sit with her and comfort her. And of course, I didn't know how to be comforting. I'm like Sheldon, like, there. And then at the same time, I was really suffering. And here I am having to look after someone else, and no one was looking after me. I found that really difficult. And at some point, I stopped going in the bathroom after her, which I know was probably mean. And a lot of people were like, what happened? Like, aren't you best friends? And I was just like, I can't care. Like, I couldn't say anything, but in my head, I'm just like, I can't care about this. I have my own problems. No one's giving a shit about me. Why should I have to do this? I found that really difficult. And so that was like the first, like, you know, real, like, I can't deal with your emotions anymore. And yeah, I sort of distanced myself from her over time, which I know she found difficult, but like, really no one was giving a shit about my problems. And yeah, I couldn't, that's when I really stopped being able to do that stuff. I was just like, fuck. But then, so yeah, also in year 9, I think that's when I was first, like, I was in the gifted and talented program. Like, I'd been in it in primary school, but then I was in it again, and there was another girl who was getting 100% on her maths tests, so they put us together, and we were doing, like, the gifted and talented thing at my school was bullshit. They just, like, get us to, you know, they give you a maths problem from, like, you know, a few grades ahead of you and be like, solve this, but not give you the tools. Like, if you didn't know in algebra that a letter represents a number, if you didn't know that, like, when I first was given that in primary school, adding letters together, I was just like, but you can't add letters. How does that work? No one told me that it represented a number. So when I learned it in year 7, I was like, oh, that's how we would have solved that. Same thing in year 9. I only learned later that we were doing a probabilities thing, and later learned the techniques. If they had taught me the techniques then, I probably could have done it, but they didn't. So they just sort of like, they think that because you're good at, you're good at your school stuff, your academic, whatever. They think that you just magically know stuff. And this is when Google was very early on. So I didn't even know to look up this stuff. I didn't even know I could look up stuff. And probably back then with the early internet, there wasn't much stuff. So I was very much on my own, just like, what am I even doing here? And the guy who was running the program clearly was not gifted and talented. And then, yeah, they shoved me with this girl, and our personalities were completely different. She was the type to go around and kiss every boy at a dance. I was the kind who was just like, I've been to one dance and that's enough for me. I don't want it. And they put us together, and then, one day, the guy who was running the program just left us in the room for ages. I don't know how fucking long it was, but I think he just wanted us, to start talking to each other. Like, if we talked to each other as two of the smartest kids in our grade, maybe we'd, I don't know, get some benefit from that. But personality-wise, we were complete opposites. It was terrible. It was excruciating sitting there. And I was like, now I can talk. Back then, I could not talk. It was really hard for me to say anything at all. And so we just sat there quietly. I don't know what her experience was like, but we just sat there quietly and awkwardly the whole time, waiting for this guy to come back. It was terrible. And, any time that I had to tell her something, like pass on a message, it was super awkward for me to open my mouth and say anything to this chick. I really struggled with that. I think I did have social anxiety early on in high school. I think a lot of people do. Now it's more like, and I also just had no interest in people. So that made it even harder. Just like, why should I even talk to these people? I don't give a shit. So yeah, year 9, that was difficult. Year 10 though, I made a conscious effort to change and to not be depressed. And it kind of helped. Like, it's like, is it the Oatmeal or something? There's one of those web cartoons where she's like, is it a he or a she? I think it's a she. Like crying or something, and lies down on the floor and happens to see like a bit of corn under the fridge and just starts laughing, and then that kind of helps trigger a temporary recovery from depression. It was a bit like that. So I was out somewhere with my parents, and I rarely talked to my parents before this point, but I was out somewhere with my parents, and I think we got like a Happy Meal, and it came with like a little Mr. Happy toy or something, and I was just looking at that going like, why can't I be more like that? And then just decided, okay, I'm just gonna try to be happy. And so that was a weird year, because like I managed to pull it off. Like, I just engaged myself in more stuff, and I tried to be more happy, tried to act more happy, tried not to wallow. And what did I do? Yeah, I did more performances. Like, our school had these music festival type things, and so I entered a lot of different things. I think maybe also the following year I did. I don't even remember. I might be getting confused with my timelines, but yeah, year 10 I definitely made an attempt to change, but I was still awkward in a lot of ways, because that year we had, instead of dances, we had formals. And I thought, well, I don't know what a formal is like. I might as well go. And unfortunately, this formal, the first formal we had, was on a boat, which meant once I got the shits with it, I couldn't escape. And I went with one of my cousins. He wanted to go because I guess he knew people who were also going. So I just took him rather than, like, I don't even know any boys to take outside family. So I went with him, and I dressed up in one of Mum's dresses and like some shoes. But the shoes, like while I was there, one of the straps on Mum's dress broke, and so it was kind of awkward trying to make sure it didn't fall down too far. And also my feet started cramping in these weird little shoes. I prefer sport shoes. These were more like nice looking shoes. And I had a terrible time. My feet were cramping. The food was okay, I guess, but I was a picky eater even back then. And then people were dancing, and I just didn't understand, like, I didn't like this music. I don't understand, why would you just dance? I guess because I didn't get, like, the anhedonia stuff probably wasn't still an issue for me, so I didn't really understand the appeal of just dancing or just standing around with drinks talking. Or I don't even know if we had alcohol back then. We probably didn't. We would have been too young. But I know people on the top deck were smoking, so I couldn't even go up there to just get some air and some quiet. It was terrible. And so after that, I never went to a formal again. I was just like, fuck this. This is not for me. So even though I was trying to be happier and more social, I really struggled because it was really not me. Then year 11, I kind of just stopped trying. which is a bit of an awkward time because that's the first half of like preparing for the HSC. Yeah, I just like stopped trying in a lot of subjects. I didn't really study. I didn't really give a shit. Like, I guess, year 10, I tried so hard to be happy that by the time I got to year 11, I had nothing left. I was just empty, like, what's the point? Like, so I wasn't full depressed, but I was just like disengaged. And I remember school teachers, especially like we had this new math teacher come in who didn't know that I was one of the top students. And so she was kind of surprised being told I was a top student, and then I wasn't performing. I was actually not doing well in my marks. And so she was kind of confused about that. And it was mentioned to me, like, we thought you were this, why aren't you doing this? Yeah, so that was definitely a thing. But, even though my grades dropped, no one really gave me any help. No one really noticed. No one's like, what's wrong with you? They're just like, why are you doing this? Why aren't you trying harder? No one thought, gee, maybe there's a problem. Same thing happened in year 9, actually, when I was really badly depressed. I was so depressed my grades did drop. And no one thought, maybe we should keep an eye on this chick. Because my grades were still higher compared to my peers, I guess. They're like, oh, it's a dip, but she's still doing better than the other kids. She can't be that bad. But like for me, like what about looking at what my baseline is? My baseline was my baseline might be high, but I had dropped. Isn't that a sign that there's something wrong with me? And they just didn't. No one thought maybe there was a problem. No one gave me help either in year 9 or year 11 when grades were dropping. Whereas, my other brother, the one who's not disabled, when he played up earlier in school, they did give him counselling. I never got any counselling. The only time I remember seeing a counsellor, I think, is, that girl who had been crying in the bathroom. I think that year, actually, year 11, she had some kind of other issue and I had to go with her to the counsellor. But I think I also had to do that for her at uni. I don't know. I'm a bit vague. I think I've done a few too many things. I don't have a lot of contact with her these days. She finally found a boyfriend and got married, I think, so she doesn't need me anymore, thank God. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so no one helped me. And it took me a while to like give a shit. I think maybe that year might also be when I went to like the parent-teacher meeting. Like usually I didn't go to those, but I thought I'd go out of curiosity, and then yeah, the teachers were like, don't know why she's not doing well. We thought she was going to be like the ducks and all this kind of stuff and blah, blah, blah. And so I guess I felt a little bit pressured there, but that was probably later in the year. And that might be why I started trying harder in year 12. I'm not sure. But anyway, like I was not doing so well. Also, that was a weird year for sport. Like, I'd done, throughout high school, I started doing Taekwondo. I also did like for a year or two, I did soccer. Maybe it was only 1 year, but mostly Taekwondo. And yeah, year 11, I got my black belt, but doing that in school, we weren't allowed to do breaking at that school at that level. We had to be a higher level before we were allowed to do board breaking. So it was a bit of a strict downgrading. And also when you're doing the like, non-contact combat part of the assessment, they kind of just set all the little kids running after me, and so I had to be very careful not to hit them, so I spent most of the time just running away from them. But part of the martial arts is knowing when not to fight, so I guess that got me through, but it was kind of ridiculous. But I did get my black belt, and also I went in a tournament, and because I'm kind of small and all the other girls who tend to do a sport like that are a lot bigger than me, it was hard to fit me in the right weight category and belt category, so I ended up fighting people who were bigger than me, and they kept hitting me in the head, which at that level that we were at is an instant disqualification. You're not allowed to do headshots at that level. So I won by default, and I got gold. Came first. But what they didn't know, I've told this story before, there's only 4 people in each thing. And so, whoever wins from there goes up to the next one, and then you get your winner. So you get gold, silver, and 2 bronzes. Like everyone comes out with a medal or a trophy. But my school didn't realize that. So all my school heard is that I got a black belt and I came first in a tournament. And they're like, wow, isn't she amazing? And I won most improved at Taekwondo and also outstanding sportswoman of the year across the whole school, which was just ridiculous. Because I was not fit. I was up in the sound and lighting box running the PowerPoint for the sports assembly and got called down twice and had to run all the way up to the stage, by which point I was out of breath thinking someone is going to notice that I'm not fit. and shouldn't be getting this award. And it was very awkward. So that was a weird thing that happened. Like, I was doing the PowerPoint because I was a nerd. I was not a sports person. So that was a weird thing that happened then. I think also the school kind of wanted to recognize me for something other than academics, and they thought this will be our excuse. But I don't even know how they found out about these things. Who told them I got a black belt? Who told them I came first in the tournament? It wasn't me, so I don't know how that happened. Also in year 11, so I think this is when, that might have been the year that my family, we went on holiday to Lindeman Island, and yeah, they've got sporting activities, but also me being me, this might be a sign of like some of the schizoid stuff I used to do. I printed out a bunch of pages from Wikipedia about things like Atlantis and other, you know, myths, mythological things, mythological concepts. I printed out Wikipedia and took this thick stack of Wikipedia articles with me on this holiday to read by the pool. That is what I did for fun. Like, I did go and do the, windsurfing and, you know, tried to do the trapeze thing, failed miserably at it. Archery, I did all that kind of stuff, but I read by the pool. And they had like a kids club where they would do activities with you. But like, you know, I did one day where we did a performance and then I just didn't go back because like socializing with the kids was not for me. I would rather go and read printed out Wikipedia articles by the pool. So that's the thing that I did. In year 11, I would have been about 17. Okay, so that was a weird year. Like, I had sort of stopped giving a fuck about school and wasn't trying properly, wasn't getting help when I was clearly disengaging. Somehow got these sports awards though. Like, I did the taekwondo. Taekwondo is a very individualistic sport. Like, yes, we were a school team, but there was only like, I might have been the only person who turned up from my school that year. I don't know. It was, yeah. And martial arts, like, you know, that ties into a bit of fantasy stuff too, I reckon. Anyway, yeah, printing Wikipedia, probably a sign that I was not like the other kids. Anyway, year 12, because that was the HSC, that's the final year of school, and the marks you get determine what you can apply for at university. So I finally learned to study. The way I did that is I got out my old Game Boy, restarted Pokemon Red, and if I played 1 hour of Pokemon Red, I would study for 1 hour. This is like when we get into the HSC, I did that, and I told my parents I need study chocolate, so I got as much chocolate as I wanted. But yeah, I was playing the same amount of Pokemon as I was doing my study for those final exams, and so that was more than 100 hours by the end of it. So I'm not sure what time frame, but that's how I eventually taught myself to study, and I finally started doing well again in year 12. But that's because it kind of counted. Like, if it didn't count for anything, I was just like, eh. But then it counts, and there's, you know, all this official stuff. So finally I was able to pick up my academic act. But yeah, I really struggled before that. But there were also some weird things. So like, we had to sit alphabetically in homeroom at the start of the day, and I was sitting next to this girl. She came in one day, and it had been her 18th birthday the night before, and so she turned 18. That's when you can drink alcohol in Australia. I think it might be different in America, I don't know. But she came in and she was really upset because she could remember her birthday, which told her she didn't drink enough, and so she feels like she didn't have enough fun. And I was just shocked by this, because I've never really had interest in alcohol and also not in partying. And then she's upset because she didn't pass out or didn't have a blackout. And I'm just like, I am not like these people. What the fuck is this? That was really weird to me. So that's something that sticks out from that year. Yeah, I skipped the formal, like, after we did our final exams. Like, I did the whole graduation things you kind of expected to, but then instead of going to my formal, I fucked off to America with mum, and, you know, we went to LA, Las Vegas, Disneyland kind of stuff. That was a long time ago. I don't know if I would be game to go now because America's gotten weirder and weirder. But anyway, yeah. And then I also never bothered to get my yearbook because, I don't know, I think they called us to get it on a certain day and I couldn't be bothered. And so I just never got my yearbook, never chased it up. So I don't have a yearbook from that year. I think my parents have ones from all the other years. They should have just mailed it to me, the fuckwits, you know. It's a private school. They can't afford to mail it. Anyway, so that's kind of like, yeah, year 12. I don't know if I remember much. Like, I kind of just did what I had to. Year 11, I had been doing drama, but you know, I realized I wasn't going to get anywhere with that in year 12. So I just did, you know, my 4 units of maths, chemistry, the mandatory religion units that we had to do. English was also mandatory, and design and technology, which is when I did the bonsai. So if you look on I've got bonsai tutorials, the ones that I uploaded in 2008, I filmed in 2006, and you can see how stiff I was trying to do video. I was very awkward, but I always had like a bit of a thing for video, and so that's probably why I ended up being a YouTuber. I did do drama and film in year 9, mainly because I wanted to play with video technology. Yeah, so then for the HSC, I did that video, and you can still see it. So that's probably the closest most of you will ever see of what I used to be like. And I was trying so hard to be a presenter, but oh my God, it's hard for me to watch because I look so awkward. Anyway, yeah, so year 12, like, I did okay with it. But yeah, just like, you know, avoiding a lot of the social shit associated with graduation. I just did what I was expected to do, basically. Yeah, so that's sort of like high school. Like, there's so much more that I could fit in, but we're already on like 35 minutes in, so I'll just quickly touch on the first year out of school, because that's when I would have turned 19. So that's when I went to university, and now I was told in university that people would be more interesting, and also that people would be smarter, and also that university would be more interesting, and also that maths would be more interesting in uni, because I was not enjoying maths. But people are like, oh no, it's all good when you get to uni. So, you know, like, I didn't even know what I wanted to do in uni. I applied for psychology originally, but I think I didn't quite scrape into that at the uni I wanted to go to. So I just did a combined science and arts degree initially, which would have been a 5-year degree if I hadn't dropped out after a semester. But yeah, so I did the psychology subjects, I did Japanese religion, and then the mandatory maths subjects. But, you know, the reason I was okay with doing maths is because people had told me it would get better. People lied. It was not any better. I mean, the advanced maths was better than standard maths. Like, before I completely quit uni, the second semester I did drop down a bit, but it was too easy. And still, yeah, I hated it so much. But it was studying for those maths exams in particular, at the end of the first semester, where I realized I hated what I was doing. And I finally got diagnosed with depression that year, because that's when I was like, I'm out of school, and this is like, I think the loss of structure really fucked me up. Like, in year 9 when I was depressed, at least I still had the school structure. I'd still go to school and do the thing. But then after that, especially when I dropped out of uni, it was just like, what am I supposed to do with life now? Where's all the, like, you know, I had no idea how to handle life. And there's always been things that other people seem to know just magically, and I always feel like I'm out of the loop. So, like, for example, when I was disappointed by uni, you know, like, people are supposed to be better, but then I sat down in one class and next to this girl, and the first thing she asks me is about my boyfriend, and I'm like, I don't have one and I don't care. And so, yeah, in that first semester, after a while, I kind of started doing things just to, like, sort of weird people out a bit, like the way I dressed. Actually, I was dressing weird from the start, but I would just be more and more kind of strange and not giving a shit about them. And I hope none of those fashion pictures of me back then are still on the internet, because they were pretty like, what? But, you know, whatever. Like, I was really struggling to figure out who I was as well. But so when I decided I hated uni, I dropped out. I thought I was going to start a business, but here's another example of me not knowing how the world works. I didn't really know what that meant. Like, I thought I'd just start selling stuff, whereas now I understand more how businesses are, and I still don't think I could really do it. But yeah, back then, like, it took me a while to realize that I don't actually know how the world works. I'm so cut off from everything that nothing makes sense to me. Yeah, so that didn't go well. I sold a few things on eBay and then lost interest. 2007 is also when I got my first job, though. Like, early in 2007, I got my first job at McDonald's. And I think that's one of the things that helped me start to talk to people, because I was still in uni, found it very difficult to talk to people. Like, wandered around campus thinking this is going to be like, you know, socializing is supposed to be better here, and it was not. And so I ended up, like, I tried joining clubs but often wouldn't go, and just sort of was really isolated by the end of that semester. But yeah, with the McDonald's job, you know, I sort of learned a social script, and so it wasn't like I didn't have to come up with stuff. I just did the same pattern, and I guess I went a bit more on autopilot when I was at work, unless something unexpected happened, and that would really throw me off until I learned a new autopilot routine. But yeah, when I had my first shift, I had this really good manager who first I stood next to him and watched him do, you know, taking an order, and then he stood next to me and watched me take orders, and then he hid under the desk so that it looked like I was alone, but actually he was still there helping me. And then after a while he went away and I was taking orders on my own, and that's how I don't know, he was really amazing. I never saw anyone do that again, training someone like that. I don't know if he had a sense of what I needed to be able to do the job, or like if that's what he did for everyone and I just didn't see it. I don't know what, but he was amazing at helping me get the idea of how to do that and how to just have an image. You know, I had McDonald's me, and McDonald's me would serve people, and I would just not have to engage too much. It did throw me off early on when, you know, I'd be like, hi, how are you? And someone would say, good, how are you? And I'm like, I don't have an answer. That the first time that happened, I froze, but after a while I, you know, realized just to say, good, what can I get, you know, I can't even remember. I probably just asked them their order after that. Like, it took me a while to figure that out. But once I had it down, I could just do that on autopilot. I also was quite happy in the drive-through box. You know, sometimes I'd just be in there completely on my own, and I'd just make those little cup holder things. I'd just, you know, build those. I'd have a stack of them behind me, waiting for ages. I could do both jobs at the same time. I could take orders and do money at the same time. So they got a lot of value out of me. I was completely on my own, quite happy in that box. Whereas I think other people didn't want to be in that box because they didn't like being alone. So there's this little bit of a schizoid thing, even at McDonald's. And then, yeah, I ended up at the front as well, doing the actual getting food for drive-through because I was good at it and fast. And I think if I'd stayed there, they probably would have trained me for the fucking cafe, even though I don't drink coffee. Anyway, yeah, so that was my first year out of school. So like I became increasingly isolated, but I also learned more how to put on the social front. So it's a bit of a paradox. Like as my teenage years went on, I became more and more isolated, but at the same time gradually learned more and more techniques to, I guess maybe it's that dissociation thing, or just like the covert schizoid. I was starting to develop it then. I didn't really develop it properly until a lot later. I think getting on YouTube and practicing talking, and then getting to music school and having to perform, I think those things really helped with that last push to get me more able to speak the way that I do now. But I still do have problems. It depends a bit on the situation and how well I'm doing, but I'm a lot better at it than I used to be. And so I think the seeds of that were in high school. It's, yeah, kind of like different trajectories. So I definitely went on more of a decline and then had this gradual start of getting better at the image, if that makes sense. Yeah, so overall, if I can summarize my 12 to 19, also some other themes from that time. I was often left to myself. You know, my parents, because like, you know, you're a teenager, you catch the bus to school by yourself, you're fine. I started catching the bus to school when I was very young, and it's only if I had something early on in the morning, like really early, like when I was doing 4-unit maths, that was before school, it didn't fit into the normal timetable, so I'd have to be driven in. Or if I had taekwondo, my grandparents would pick me up afterwards and play opera to me. Or classical music. That might be partly why I sing the way I do, because I was surrounded by that when I was younger. So it's not quite operatic, but it is semi-classical, whereas I didn't really listen to as much contemporary because I didn't like pop music, and that's all I had access to. I didn't get access to metal until I left high school, and it took me a while to find anything I liked. I think the first alternative music I liked was actually 9 Inch Nails, and then after that I started to find metal that I did like. I know 9 Inch Nails is more industrial, but yeah, so I was often left to myself. I didn't really get help even when there were signs that I was not doing well. Like in year 9 when I was depressed, I was crying, and I remember my brother Dave being like, there's something wrong with her. And it wasn't my parents who gave me a hug, it was my grandpa who happened to be over and gave me a hug. And no one thought to get me help. I know mental health awareness wasn't as big of a thing back then, but Does that not ring any alarm bells? I don't know. But this was in the early 2000s, so it's like 20 fucking years ago. Wow, I am so old. Yeah, and I was also becoming increasingly disconnected and sort of confused by other people's behavior, because back when the kids were into fantasy stuff, I could connect with them at least in some way. But as they became more interested in, you know, studying and being adult-like and, you know, boyfriends and shit, I just had less and less in common with them. I can remember, like, in high school, it became more like I'd have okay relationships with someone one-on-one, but then they'd rotate and they'd go off and another person would come in my orbit and we'd talk more, and then they'd disappear, and I just sort of like rotated through people a bit like that. And then at other times I'd try and sit on my own, but because I was, by late high school, I had accidentally fallen into the nerdy Asian group. There was the cool Asian group and the nerdy Asian group. I was in the nerdy Asian group. I think they gravitated towards me because my marks were good, and so like sometimes I'd try and sit by myself, but they'd see me sitting by myself and they'd all come and sit with me anyway, and so I couldn't actually escape. And then if they didn't sit with me, I'd get the losers hovering around me. So it was a weird kind of a time. And also, like, you know, early on, I think I would be invited to a few things, but not so much, because the nerdy Asians would often go to tutoring together and they all lived near each other, whereas I didn't. But, you know, when we did go out, usually we went ice skating. I was the only person who was there for ice skating. They were all there to look for hot Asian guys, and that's a quote. That is exactly what they call them, hot Asian guys. I was there to ice skate. They were just looking at guys. So yeah, as time went on, they stopped inviting me to stuff because they knew that I wasn't interested. And yeah, so I would have to organize stuff if I wanted anything to happen, and I kind of was just like, oh, what's the fucking point? So yeah, there's so much that I can't cover in this, but I hope that gives like some idea of some of the main things that I could think off the top of my head when I was writing my notes, and also just now. Yeah, strange time, but some of the early signs of me being a bit odd, and some of my most schizoid behavior happened in that time. There's not much to say about it though, it's just like being withdrawn, not saying very much. Even when people like pissed me off, I just wouldn't really react. I was just sort of like internally annoyed. I couldn't show any of that. That's probably a part of why I like got the dissociation thing and would go home and write on this RPG, this violent stuff. I was pretty sad when that thing ended. I think we must have all been around the same age. Like I was writing with a couple of Americans, maybe 3 Americans at one point. So I would be up late at night, they would be up early in the morning wherever they were, and we'd actually organize times. We used to talk on AOL Messenger, AOL Instant Messenger, and then later on MSN Messenger, and sort of plan storylines. And yeah, we had our own characters and we had a specific way of doing things. And yeah, the storylines were kind of fun, and sad that that's gone, because I've sort of felt I really started to feel lost when I lost that, I think. And that's when also the dissociation issues became more of a problem for me in real life as well, but that's a different story. God, there's so much I could talk about and I just can't fit it in, but I'm gonna leave it there. Otherwise I'm gonna go on for ages. It's getting dark. I'm gonna go home and get some tea. I will be back here when I feel like vlogging again. Maybe I might just read a book though, because it's nice and quiet here. Nice not to be interrupted. Anyway, that's all for now. Catch you on the next one.